Okay, we didn't have any sound, did we? I was looking in the live chats and I saw that. Wow. Okay. Sorry about that, you guys. I think you can hear me now. Okay, so the point that I'm making with this is that let me go back and redo these. So this is how we dress today. This is how we dressed in the 1900s, and this is how they dressed in the 1800s. The difference between the 1800s and the 1900s is way different than the way we dressed in the 1900s and today. So that was the big point that I was trying to make. Sorry I didn't have any audio there. I'm going to have to watch this because every time I switch to the different images, it goes back to different audio situations. So, sorry guys. Now, fashion obviously is not necessarily an indicator of progress of society, although some people might argue that it is. But let's look at things like war, for example. So let's look at war. All right, so the War of 1812, we still had guys wearing brightly colored suits, marching in lines, shooting muskets at each other and cannons and stuff like that. 100 years later, at World War I, we had tanks, we had planes, we had machine guns, and it was a vastly different type of war. Now, World War I was super crazy because it also still had horses in it. Like, there were still people marching with horses against tanks. World War I was insane. You also had chemical weapons during World War I. Totally different thing that they didn't have 100 years before. So the advancement of war was enormous. Now, you could make the argument that in the 1900s, war changed in a similarly significant way due to things like drones and airplanes and space technology and nuclear weapons. That's probably the big one that has made the difference in the 1900s. But I still want to make the argument that the way wars were fought at the beginning of the 1800s was incredibly vastly different than the way it was at the end of the 1800s. Let's look at communication. At the beginning of the century, everything was run by horses. Everything was just, there's nothing for me to show here. I should go back to me. At the beginning of the 1800s, information traveled only as fast as a horse could carry it, literally. People in cities far away from Washington, D.C. didn't hear about the news of what was going on in the government for weeks, maybe even months. But then, halfway through the 1800s, you get the telegraph. Telegraph lines went up all across the country and information traveled instantly. And then by the end of the 1800s, you had radio with Marconi in, what year was that? Marconi was in 1901, actually. So that the communication thing actually is really interesting. At the very beginning of the 1800s, like 1801, is when they first created telegraphy. But that's when the telegraph first got started in 1801. Radio became a commercial device in 1901. So there was like literally a 100-year period there where we went from now telegraph didn't become a commercial thing until like the 1850s, really, but it was invented in the very early 18th century or 1800s. Transportation, you can't overstate how much transportation changed in the 1800s. We went from a horse carriage that, again, you could only travel as fast as a horse could take you. Trains existed in 1807 was the very first train in Wales, and the first car was created in 1885. And by 1900, cars were a very common thing on the roads. And something that a lot of people don't know, a lot of the first cars were actually electric cars because the gas engine had not been perfected yet, although engine technology had been in a renaissance, or not a renaissance, but it was basically born in the 1800s. Again, one of these things that fundamentally changed the way we live as people. And it's kind of funny that some of the first cars were electric cars because now electric cars are becoming popular again. It's kind of like going full circle. But in the United States, at the beginning of the 18th century, actually in 1806, Lewis and Clark first did their expedition across the United States to the West Coast. It took them 3 years to do that. But then the Transcontinental Railroad went through in the mid-1800s. By the end of the century, it just took a matter of days to get from one side of the country to the other. At the beginning of the century, the west coast of the country had not even been explored. They didn't even know what was there. And by the end of the century, you could go there in just a few days. That's amazing. That's incredible. Steamships started to happen. In 1800, the way you had to get around was through sailing boats. It took forever to get anywhere. By the 1900s, you had steamships taking you everywhere you wanted to go. The Titanic crashed in 1912. So that was something that opened up the world to people. Excuse me. That opened up the world to people in ways that they hadn't been able to travel the world before. So it made new connections around the world that didn't exist. So it kind of made the world a smaller place, opened up trade routes and whatnot that didn't exist before, really changed a lot of things in the world. Medicine. Let's look at medicine for a second. In 1799, George Washington died. The cause of his death was that he was bled to death by his doctors. He had a flu or a cold of some kind, and the doctors literally bled him to death because their understanding at the time was that the body was made up of 4 humors and that those humors were out of balance, and the only way to fix it was to produce blood. By the 1850s, Louis Pasteur came along, and the germ theory of disease was created. They didn't know what germs were at the beginning of the 1800s. And by the 1875, Louis Pasteur created the first vaccination. So they were actually able to vaccinate against diseases for the first time. And the first antibiotic was created by Alexander Fleming. That was penicillin. That was in 1924, a couple decades into the 1900s. But that road had been paved to get there by the 1900s. So also you can look at our scientific understanding at the beginning of the 1800s. They were still basically where Isaac Newton had left them. But, Einstein had something that he called the miracle year. He didn't call it that, but it became known as the miracle year in 1905, where he published 4 papers, including the ones on general and special relativity, that basically changed the way we think about the universe and about physics in general, and changed everything about the way we understand science. And that was kind of built on the shoulders of progress that had been laid out in the 1800s. So the main point that I want to make here is the 1800s went from a time where, nobody had seen what the president actually looked like. And then photography came along. People could actually see images of the president that wasn't interpreted through some painter or something like that. The words of the president or of the head of state, wherever you might be, were suddenly able, you could hear them on the radio by the end of this century. Before, at the beginning of this century, everything that a head of state had to say had to be interpreted through a press that took forever to get where it was going because it was not instantaneous. Instantaneous communication became a thing. And I think the combination of mechanized travel and worldwide, by the way, through the steamships, and instantaneous communication fundamentally changed the world in a way that had never been seen before. And while the 1900s, this is something that we can talk about in the comments and in the chats. I think this is actually a very interesting topic. The changes that we've seen in the 1900s have been immense with computer and internet technology and that kind of thing. That is, you can't even question that. The world is significantly different now than it was in 1900. But I still think that fundamentally, the way people lived at the beginning of the 1800s compared to the end of the 1800s is vastly different, more different than the difference that we see today between today and back at the beginning of this last century of the 1900s. So that's the topic. That's the topic for today. I wanted to just jump right into it and throw it out there. I had lots of images to share, so I wanted to get right into it. But I'm going to go into the live chats now. If you guys have ideas on this, if you think I'm totally whack, then you can share it there. If you're watching this later on, if you're not watching this live, please share down in the comments what you think, and I'll talk about it tomorrow. And on that note, while you guys are putting things in our chat, I'm going to jump into yesterday's comments and respond to some of the stuff that you guys had to say about the deja vu thing that I was discussing in yesterday's video. So first of all, I had a couple of people, When the Memes Are Too Spicy is the name of this guy, and another one named Damian John, who are not feeling the live streams. He says, I think I speak for a lot of people and your view count when I say that live streams aren't as appealing. Personally, I'm here for pure core science, facts, and concepts that make my brain think. This just seems less focused. And he goes on from there. And he had 17 people give him a thumbs up and 3 people who agreed with him in following comments. And I wanted to respond to that just really quickly. First and foremost, totally appreciate that feedback. And I'm not just saying that to be like, oh yeah, come on, Gate. No. This whole thing is an experiment. It might work, it might not. At the end of this month, I might never do this again. Or it might be something that I'll do once a week or something. We'll see. Really, it's mostly for me as somebody who is now sort of a professional doing this as a job, to get a handle on live streams, to understand how it all works for professional reasons, but also just because that's kind of where all the social media is going. I just kind of want to see if I can make it work. And if it doesn't work, absolutely, I'll go right back to what I was doing before. I'm not locked into this. This is totally a 1-month trial. And this isn't meant to take the place of the Monday videos. I know I've slipped a little bit on the Monday videos because setting all this up has been more of an ordeal than I thought it would be. I apologize for that, but it's not going to completely take over. Gosh, I'm burping. Sorry about that. It's not going to completely take over the others. So let's see. So going back to the deja vu topic. PRM68 says, Joe, listen to Anthony Peake. You will find what he has to say interesting and it's relevant to this topic. He has many books out and is also on YouTube. It's worth checking out. Okay, I'll check it out. Haven't heard of him before. Thank you. Let's see. I actually got a lot of comments on this. I appreciate it. I'm having too many for it to go through. Let me see. Actually, some of these are way too long. Writer Storm left a couple of comments that were really good. I can't really read all of them. He said maybe deja vu is because we're constantly absorbing data, so much in fact that we can't consciously absorb it all. So when something repeats, your subconscious is aware of this repeating circumstance, but your consciousness is not aware. And deja vu is actually your conscious and subconscious having a conversation that goes something like this. Hey, do you remember this? No, well, I do. That's all. That's interesting. That's an interesting point. I think that's kind of along the same lines of what I was talking about yesterday. Just the thing that fascinates me about the recent brain research and where deja vu fits into that is the whole idea that our brain is actually a group of semi-conscious modules all communicating with each other, and that the unified conscious experience that we have is sort of an illusion. I find that fascinating. All right, let's jump into the comments, or jump into the live stream here. So, Matt Kowaleski, hey Joe, I love your channel, by the way. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Matt. That means a lot to me. Alwyn De Silva also says, keep up the good work. How many people are watching right now? We got 40. All right, got a good crowd going. Curiz says the world probably changed more geographically in the 1900s. Geographically by borders of nations and stuff like that, you may mean? Obviously, the coastlines didn't change too much in the 1900s. Graham Wilson believes that Einstein's mind is immortal. It is in a jar somewhere, so I don't know if that's true. Quiet Grave wants me to talk more about immortality. I've already done a few videos about that. Yeah, Alwyn De Silva, can you update us on the Immortals project? I can look into it. I don't know if there's anything new to report. I haven't heard anything else, but I haven't been looking into it, so I'll try to do that. Just Q says, you can say that the 1900 was upgrading what we had in the 1800. See, that's kind of where I was thinking. The 1900s, the 20th century, I guess is what you might call it, but the 1900s, definitely technology progressed at an alarming rate, but it feels like the foundations for that change were set up in the 1800s. And it was something I'd never really thought about before, and I think it's something that we probably don't appreciate that much as a society. We're all so caught up in what's changing right now. Quiet Grave says to scroll up, there's questions. There's a lot of questions, guys. Let's see. Do you not think like a jumper you could invent something? Einstein let's invent a theory for internet communication, says Graham Wilson. I'm not sure what that means, sorry. Nivlak Fun says, I saw a video from Sharky. Joey, you should watch it. It talks about how inventions are actually becoming less normal and it's getting harder and harder to find new inventions. I have not seen that video, but I've heard that argument made that sort of all the major things there are to discover might have already been discovered in the last couple hundred years, and right now we're sort of just adding layers to that. I find that a little depressing, actually, but it's interesting. Let's see. Super Duper Cooper says, but within the last 20 years, we have developed computers almost from scratch, as well as Skype and video chat. There's a good argument to be made there, and I like this conversation because there's a lot to discuss and a lot of different points to make. But I still want to make the argument that pre-1800s, there was no such thing as instant communication at all. And that itself fundamentally changed the way we react in the world, possibly more so than what's going on right now. It's definitely improving and becoming cooler. Like what I'm doing right now was barely possible even 5 years ago. And that's definitely a really cool point to make. But I still go back to like this fundamental aspect of it. I think fundamentally the world changed more in the 1800s. I could be wrong, and it's all up for conjecture, but that's where I'm going with this. Jashani said, I think starting a little before the beginning of the 21st century, our technological advancement started advancing in kind of a square root 3 graph. I don't know what that is. Where over time we advance faster and faster. So exponential is what you're saying. So now we're talking Ray Kurzweil. Kurzweil obviously goes into how technology is an exponential curve, and we're in that exponential curve. And that actually gets me thinking about something that's kind of interesting to me. You know, we talk about the singularity as this point that's ahead of us somewhere. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe the singularity is not this thing that's going to flip at the snap of a finger, but something that is a progress. Like, are we in the singularity right now and we don't know it? Has the singularity been going on since the 1800s? Has this whole thing been the singularity? Think about that. I find that an interesting topic. Okay, Quiet Grave said, what do you think made the biggest difference in the 1800s as far as communications that at the same time overshadows similar invention in the 1900s? I'm going to say radio. I'm going to say radio and photography because, okay, I'm going to be a little cheesy for a second. If any of you have seen Downton Abbey, yes, I watched Downton Abbey with my wife. Shut up. There's a scene in there, so this takes place in like the 1920s. There's a scene where a radio gets brought into the house and they listen to a speech from the king. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is I always thought it was a fascinating scene because the younger people were all just like, ooh, cool, we can hear the king. But the older people felt it was kind of tawdry. It was like, how dare you hear the king's voice? You're not worthy of hearing the king's voice. And I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it because it created a different relationship between the ruling class and the commoners, so to speak. And so I feel like radio, actually hearing the head of state with your own ears and being able to see them through photographs, like literal pictures of them, I think that changed a lot of things in terms of, I just feel like that created a whole new dynamic of society. Debate me if you want. I feel like those two things created sort of a different paradigm of the world. Anyway, so we're starting to run a little bit late. It's 25 minutes in. Mind equals blown, says Owen De Silva. Let me just see if I can find another couple of thoughts here. Yeah, okay, so Kenny Diamond says, I fixed the camera quality and sound, pretty awesome, but he feels like it's a little bit laggy, not really in bad ways. So yeah, I'm still working on this, guys. I was able to work the sound so that it would sync up a little bit better, but it still is a little bit jittery, more jumpy than I would like for it to be. And I think for now, this is how it's going to be. Unfortunately, unless I go get a whole different camera or unless I get a whole different setup, which I'm not quite ready to start like buying equipment to do this. But we'll see. There's a couple of people I'm talking with that do this a lot that are going to help me out, and maybe I can get something that works a little bit better. Samurai94 said transistors changed everything. Good point. Cures. I'm just going to say Cures. Your name is weird. Maybe the next 100 years will be the foundation for better energy generation. I think so. I made an argument somewhere else that I'm not too against fossil fuels because we wouldn't be where we are without them, but it is time for us to shift our energy generation to a new and more sustainable way of doing things. And I hope that that is going to be the path of the next couple of centuries. All right, let's find one more. Let's find one more. Sorry, I'm trying to find it. I could use some help with this. I could use somebody that could pull out questions for me so I'm not sitting here staring at the computer. La, la, la. So Matt Kowaleski said there's a theory we might be reaching the limit of our technological advancement and one day we just gonna stop. So now we're starting to talk about Moore's Law and the fact that Moore's Law may be coming to an end. I have a video in mind for that, actually. I think that's an interesting topic. I think everything about Moore's Law is interesting because it's not just that some guy came up with some path and then it kind of predicted the next 40 years, but even if Moore's Law is coming to an end, I think it's important because it's kind of like John F. Kennedy saying we're going to get to the moon in 10 years. Once you say it, there's suddenly an actualization that takes place. All of that I find very interesting. Okay, well guys, I've been talking for a little while, already going on almost 30 minutes. Had some really great stuff in the live chat. I really appreciate that. If you're watching this later on, I'm finding most people watch it later on. I want to hear more about this in the comments. If you have a thought about whether 1800s or 1900s, whichever one of those might have been more of a transformative century. I want to just put an idea in your head though, like think about somebody who was born in 1800 and lived an extraordinarily long life into their 90s. Just think about all the change they saw. Of course, the same thing could be said for somebody who was born in 1900. In fact, my grandmother, who passed away many years ago now, she was born in 1910. And I always was amazed by the idea that of all the change that she saw in her lifetimes. And then we think about all the change that we're going to see in our lifetimes. I hope it's just as transformative and just as cool because there's a lot of cool stuff going on. All right, guys, I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks if you're here on the live stream for being here. If you're not on the live stream, for sticking it out all the way through. And I'll be back tomorrow where the topic will be... I'm still deciding. I've got two different topics. One of them might be the actual normal Monday video that I'm going to do, though. So I'll surprise you. But I will be back tomorrow. Hope you guys have a good rest of the day. I appreciate you joining, and stay safe. Love you guys. Take care.